friends, and her name, it may not surprise you to know, was Emma Thompson. And she was, an extraordinary woman. I'll just tell you a story that will give an example of how obvious it was to anyone who saw her when she was just a student, that she was nominated for an Oscar for her, as an actress for her performance as Margaret Schlegel in Howard's End. And a lot of us who knew her were called up by the press, as you often are. And it's a sort of unwritten rule, you won't be surprised to know, that when the press call you, you don't speak about other people. Not unless you have the direct consent that it's an official thing. It's just bad form. You speak about yourself if you're so minded, but you don't blab about other people. So they hadn't got very far with her friends, but they found the number of a close friend of hers who was not a famous actor or anything like that, and he was rather caught on the hop when they said, "We just want to know what your feelings are about Emma being nominated for an Oscar." And he said, "Well, I'll be quite frank with you. I feel, and I think most of her friends do, extremely let down by Emma Thompson." And he said, you can actually hear the drool hitting the carpet on the other end of the line. The fellow licked his pencil and went, yeah. He said, yes, anybody who ever saw Emma Thompson as an actress when she was a student would have laid any money that she would get an Oscar before she was 30. I think she'll be just over 30 when she gets this one next month. And he basically said all there was to be said. Anyway, we became friends and we were in a number of plays together, Shakespeare plays. I was... it's a strange thing when you're a student and you're doing plays. This is Cambridge, by the way. It's not a drama school, so this was not official. These were all extracurricular. I was supposedly doing a degree in English literature, but spending all my time really having an immensely good larky time in plays. And because most of the undergraduacy, if that's a word, were really between about 18 and 21, 22, obviously... you had old people in plays. And I, because of my height and the depth of my voice and some quality of, let's be unkind to me and call it almost unacceptable pomposity, I was tended to be cast as kings and old figures of warty dukes and things of that nature. Sometimes a good part, sometimes even the lead part in the play, but often you'd come on and bless the, the couple at the end, and it would be like that. While all the trim, pert undergraduates played the love interests, the Romeos and the Juliets. And that was fine. And so I did a lot of those, some of them with Emma. But in my second year, this is where it relates to writing, to Evelyn Waugh, and to the story I was telling you about the prep school. I was asked if I might write a play. And I said, what makes you think I can write a play? I'd never written any play before. I'd never written anything involving dialogue of that nature. I'd written lots of stories and poems, and I'd written the odd sort of humorous article in Broadsheet, the Cambridge magazine at the time. They said, no, I think you will be able to. So that holiday, or VAC as they were called, university, I sat down at an old manual typewriter, Hermes typewriter, and I thought, well, all I can write a play on is what I know about, and really, all I know about is schools and prisons, but I couldn't really... Cambridge hadn't asked me if I was on probation. It's not a thing they ask their students when they come. I didn't think it polite to volunteer the information, so I thought just best leave that alone for the time being. So I wrote a play, really, about a prep school set in the strange English world. It was called Latin, and it was a comedy, a sort of satire on the peculiarity of these places and the strange sexual goings-on. And it was accounted something of a success, and a company wanted to take it up to Edinburgh, where there's a big festival, as you probably know. It's the biggest sort of fringe festival of its kind. Nothing like what the old Adelaide Festival was, obviously, but it's still jolly impressive. And I remember Emma coming to it, and she brought a friend of hers, and I remember he was a tall chap with sort of triangular red banners of blush mark on his cheeks. I mean, not blusher, but he just had sort of naturally sort of rather flushed cheeks and big blue eyes. And I said, hello. And he said, hello. And that was sort of it, really. And the play carried on, and it won an award, which was very nice. And I felt rather grand. I felt I am a writer for the first time in my life. And then the next term, which was the beginning of my last year, Emma came round to my room and she said, I want you to meet the president of the Footlights. I said, who's the president of the Footlights? I don't know. Why would all the Footlights? That's all very pro-y comedy people. She said, well, you've written a comedy play. You can write sketches. You could write monologues. You could do that. Come and see him. He's called Hugh Laurie. And I said, well, yeah, isn't it amazing? I said, I know him. I went to see the Footlights show in the first year. But I thought he must be a third year because he hasn't been in the Footlights since. And she told me the story, which is that Hugh had come up to Cambridge expressly to row, to pull a boat through the water. We've mentioned Frank Thring and Ben Hur, and we know that rowing is essentially something for convicts and galley slaves. But it seems that this Hugh Laurie, who had been expensively educated at Eton College, had devoted most of his teenage to pulling a boat through the water for fun. He was allowed to use the street unsupervised, and for all I knew, he could even use a telephone without supervision as well. But that's what he did. He arrived to Cambridge and comble de malchance, as the French say, huge misfortune struck him, glandular fever, mononucleosis, as I believe they call it in America. He had this, which you get from kissing strange girls, I believe, but anyway, he got this condition which meant that he couldn't row. And some Etonian friends said, well, you're a bloody funny fellow, actually. Seriously, no, bloody hell, actually. Really, join the bloody Footlights, you know, you'd be really funny. So Hugh said, okay, and that's where I saw him in the Footlights, and I have to say, I saw him and Emma Thompson, and Emma's boyfriend at the time, an extraordinary clownish actor called Simon McBurney, whom you may know from the Theatre of Complicité, the Théâtre de Complicité, brilliant fellow. And I just thought he was so good that it was almost unbelievable. And as I say, I then didn't see him in the second year, because in the second year he went back to this rowing thing. And then at the end of his second year, round about the time that he came to Edinburgh and saw my play Latin, he was supposedly debating within himself whether to be the president of the Cambridge University Boat Club or to be the president of the Footlights. Occasionally in an interview he claims he tossed a coin and it came down Footlights. But anyway, he found himself president of Footlights with only Emma Thompson, really, who had ever been in a Footlight show before, because all the second and third years had cleared out, and so he wanted someone to write with. So Emma takes me to his rooms in his college, and the door is opened by his girlfriend Katie, and there's Hugh, and I can picture the scene exactly, sitting on a bed with a guitar, and he went, hello, and I said, hello. We are people who actually spell hello H-U-L-L-O when we speak to each other. And he said, I've written a song. It's the first thing he said. I think Katie said, would you like a cup of coffee? But he said, I've written a song. So he played the song. It was a marvellous song, made me laugh very much. And he showed me, I'm writing this stuff. And essentially, we started writing there and then. It was the most extraordinary thing. I can say this to you, Sydney. I fell in love. But it was a wonderful kind of love because it was a comic love. It was a professional love. It was a collaborative love. I'm very happy to say, being something of a young bender, that I didn't fall in love with him in that way. Because handsome and striking as he is, that would have been deeply embarrassing and difficult for both of us, I suspect. And I think he with me, we fell in love with each other in a way that people who work together do. And it was another extraordinary turning point in my life. We started writing there and then. We wrote the panto, then we wrote a show, and then we went to Edinburgh. And this will sort of bring me... How are we doing on minutes, Esther? It's about 45, right? I'll finish up, because we've got our little question and answer session to come. But essentially, this brings us to no, shush and behave. It brings us to where we are now, in a sense, that when it got to Edinburgh, our show, we knew there was this thing called the Perrier Award, which was like, had just been instituted that year, which was the best comedy show on the Fringe. We also knew that the last institution that would ever win it would be the Cambridge Footlights, because, you know, we were old school, and what was beginning, this is 1981, was this new world of stand-up comedy, and we were all very much sketches, you know, knock, 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 come in, Perkins, and the sketch would begin. or it would be someone going, hello, I'd like to buy something that you obviously won't have in this shop. And